everyone, I'm Jay.
And I'm Sean.
Greetings to our friends, and well, some of you are our fellow a-holes, let's be honest. How are you today?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm pretty good. What is it we do here again?
We watch movies.
Ah, yes, thank you. How did I forget that,
How did you forget that?
So today, December 3rd, is actually the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Merry International Day of Persons with Disability Day. It's there's no really great roll off the tongue greeting for this day, but I think it's kind of an important one.
I think
and
so.
Maybe I'm biased since I'm falling into that category myself.
Still.
Many of you may not know this, but like lots of people, I fall into probably the invisible disability category, although it's not all that invisible all that much of the time. There's lots of times when it's quite visible and quite embarrassing, and yet most of my life I get up and act like a person. I'm just crying on the inside because I'm in crazy, crazy pain. So this might be hard to believe, but like almost everything we do here, we're celebrating the day, we're marking the day by watching a movie. It's a really great documentary on Netflix called Crip Camp. So, Crip Camp, oh my gosh. First of all, I'm never gonna say that again.
Yeah.
I'm gonna call it by its legal name, Camp Jeanette, because that makes me uncomfortable. But totally fine for people to take back that word if that's what they want to do. So this camp was in existence for quite some time, but in the 1970s, it had been taken over basically by hippies. You think that's fair to say?
That's absolutely fair to say.
Okay, so the people who were running the camp, and this is a very loose running of the camp, they really just wanted to build like a safe space for disabled people to come and just have a fun summer.
Yeah.
It was really like the least structured camp I've probably ever seen.
Yep.
And you would think that a camp for people with disabilities might be the more structured, but no, it was a loosey-goosey affair. Just come here and hang out for the summer. And the thing is, in the 1970s, still, the world was not accessible for disabled people of almost any kind. I don't just mean like ramps and stuff. I just like they were pushed to the margins of society and basically forgotten about a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think this movie does a good point of highlighting that this is still a time where people are just put in institutions because we don't know what else to do with them.
That's right. So some of the campers have come from institutions, but I would say most are still coming from their own homes.
Yeah.
But again, they don't go to school. They probably rarely leave the house because the world is so inaccessible. They're very isolated people. And we are talking about a group of teenagers here who are longing for social anything, for connection. And so here they come to this camp, and it is like utopia to them because they're unsupervised for the first time in their lives because they have the kind of lives where they're a lot of the time very dependent, probably at this point still on their parents and caregivers and stuff like that. They're not leaving the house except under heavy supervision with a lot of help. And at home, of course, there is no place for real privacy. And imagine feeling that way when you are a teenager.
You mean we feel that way as teenagers regardless.
Exactly.
So for it to actually be like this is unimaginable.
Yeah. So here are all these teenagers hanging out together. And the thing about that is when everyone is disabled, no one is disabled. You just don't see the disability anymore. These peers of yours see the real you. They have looked beyond the thing that we all have in common, and yeah, it's not that interesting. Let's get to know each other for our personalities, for our beliefs and our values, and the rock and roll bands we enjoy. And like any other group of teenagers at camp, they're out there playing sports and they're making out and they're singing songs around the campfire. And it's very, very normal what they're doing there. The abnormal thing is that they're not usually allowed to do it.
Yeah.
For many, if not most, if not all, this is pretty much the only place where they date. Because the dating pool, there's no Tinder yet. The dating pool is extremely small when you never really meet anyone, let alone someone who feels like they can understand your experience.
Right.
So this camp is a super pivotal time and place for all of these kids who have come together and very much, I think, enjoyed their time at Camp Jened. And so this very tight-knit group kind of follows each other around. They go to Berkeley and they sort of are setting up a utopian-like community there, but they start to think bigger because even though disabled people are a minority, it's a pretty big minority, actually. It's like 20% maybe of the population. But because that subdivides into so many different disabilities, some are invisible, some are, like, it's a very varied group.
It is, yeah.
And so it had been difficult to unite all of them because, of course, they have different needs. And I think it was very interesting to see Judith Human, who is in the documentary. She is a crazy advocate, activist, got a lot of stuff accomplished. She herself is in a wheelchair, but she would not start a meeting, a single meeting, without an interpreter for the deaf people. Yes. So there are so many different abilities and disabilities within the group that they're just now starting to organize and come together and say, we've been a little bit lucky in what we've been able to do, but we really need to get this accessibility on a larger scale. Because, of course, disabled people felt like they were the very last of the civil rights movements and that they needed to be out there just fighting to be considered like anyone else is considered. And that American Disabilities Act was not passed until 1990. So this film coincides with the 30th anniversary with the act passing, which is crazy. 1990? That's how long it took? 1990. Of course, anyone who is disabled will tell you life is still not fair. No matter what act you have passed, things are still far from equal for a lot of people with disabilities. Apparently, Barack and Michelle Obama must agree because they are producing this movie. In fact, they've been producing quite a few really great documentaries through their new production company, Higher Ground. So they've actually partnered with Netflix, and they're throwing their considerable weight behind issues that they care about. And so it was really great to see this documentary reassembling the old crew, talking about how things were and what inspired them to take this mantle on, because it was a pretty big one. And remember, all these people fighting are disabled themselves. And so there are a lot of barriers and challenges to even being able to stand up for yourself. It's really remarkable that things could be accomplished at all.
Yes, it is. It's also really interesting how they trace it back in this documentary, back to Camp Jened, and show how many people in that group go on to be advocates and activists. And it really struck me that, yeah, if you show someone what they're capable of accomplishing, they run with it. And these people in particular, this group, wow, they ran with it all the way. It's amazing.
You're right about that. I mean, people have to know that this is even possible. And before that camp, they didn't know it wasn't possible. And so just be seeing, even for a couple of weeks or whatever it is over the summer, seeing that this is what the world could be like if only people cared to, open things up to them. I think it was hard to go back home to that life of sort of isolation and not really belonging. because that's all we really want to do as humans is to belong. It doesn't matter if you're different, because I think we've established by now that everyone is different. And yeah, it's okay, but we should still demand to have the things that other people have. So it is really, I think, cool to see that this group, as you said, took it all the way, just kept pushing, because it is easy to give up after you have a little freedom yourself, but to keep going and keep pushing on behalf of other people is really special. So this documentary was directed by Nicole Newnham and co-directed by James Lebrecht, who is actually one of the campers that we see a lot of in the film. So obviously, there's a really great inside track here, a good inside scoop. So we get a lot of the history and a lot of the flavor of the camp, which of course is not a camp that could exist anymore. I don't know how really it even existed back then. And yet, thank goodness it did. Yes, yeah. There you go. Thank you, Sean. So recently we've been talking about disabled representation in movies, coincidentally, just because the movie The Witches with Anne Hathaway sort of sent some waves between among the limb difference community, and then Sia's new movie Music disrupted some people in the autism community, because it hired a non-autistic actor to once again represent a community that has been vastly underrepresented and misrepresented, I should say, as well. So I wanted to put together a list of actually disabled actors in movies, but that list is so short, like you can't, it is unbelievably short. So that means it's also doable, that you should be able to seek out each of these movies and give them a watch. So first on my list, I have Baby Driver. Such a great movie. I love this one to death. I have definitely seen it. There's no chance that I would miss this. Of course, I love Edgar Wright, the director. So it's about this young getaway driver. And he is a very quiet dude, but it's Ansel Elgort. He does not have tinnitus or whatever it is that baby has in the movie. But he lives with his foster dad, who is deaf. And the actor who plays him, C.J. Jones, is deaf in real life as well. So I think Edgar Wright auditioned plenty of people who were not deaf, but just felt like C.J. Jones was head and shoulders above the rest, because authenticity does count for something. And you can learn sign language, but if you are not deaf and relying on it, if it is not your first language, people will be able to tell, especially in the deaf community. So I think he ended up being kind of a scene stealer.
It's true. If you've seen that movie,
yes, he is the heart and the warmth of that movie. So it's really interesting how this guy, who has had a very hard time finding work, he said that to find roles for black deaf men, well, you can probably count on one finger how many times that's come up in his career. And that's why we talk so much about representation, because if those are the only roles they can get, they darn well better get those at least. Yeah. Of course, probably an actor such as C.J. Jones, who is so watchable and so lovely, could play a multitude of characters who are not necessarily defined as deaf and black. Anyways, he has apparently found a second role, because he will be in Avatar 2.
Oh, that's cool.
So the Na'vi have their own language, and he plays an interpreter.
Interesting.
Yes. So the next movie, Run, is one we've already talked about here. It is a recent movie released on Hulu, starring Sarah Paulson and Kira Allen. So Kira Allen plays a sick young woman in the movie. She's a senior in high school. She can't wait to go to college, because she has led, even in 2020, this life of relative isolation. She and her mother live out in the country, so that's not disability friendly. There's no way for her to get into town and like live life on her own terms. She is in a wheelchair. And Kira Allen, the actress, is in a wheelchair in real life. This role is incredibly physical. It's a thriller movie, like a borderline horror movie thriller. She is running for her life. She is effectuating a pretty big escape. So it's very physically demanding, and she kills it. So I certainly hope we see a lot more of her, because for a young actress with very little acting experience under her belt to come in and be able to go up against Sarah Paulson is pretty remarkable. Chained for Life is the next one on the list. An indie movie that you may have missed the first time around, but it's also relatively recent. It stars Adam Pearson, who in real life has neurofibromatosis type 1. So basically, for him, it's manifested in facial deformities. And so in the movie, he is playing an actor with facial deformities. And he and his leading lady are having a tough time connecting, because the actress, is really struggling to connect with him, to see beyond just what's there. And so I think obviously there is a meta sort of connection, as himself being an actor with the same deformities, I think must have been difficult, but also he brings so much experience, lived experience to the role, that's what makes it so great. Peanut Butter Falcon. Sean knows I'm obsessed with this movie. It stars Zach Gottsagen, who is a young man with Down syndrome in real life and in the movie, where he plays a young man named Zach who lives in a care home and decides to escape, to hit the road, to pursue his dreams of being a professional wrestler. So he has almost a Huckleberry Finn kind of escape. He's got Shia LaBeouf and Dakota Johnson as his sidekicks.
Well, I think Shia LaBeouf is a good choice if you want to go into the world of professional wrestling.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I think of all the Hollywood stars, he's going to get you the furthest or among it.
Okay.
Maybe The Rock is a little bit better.
Maybe.
But Shia LaBeouf is pretty high on the list.
Yeah, okay. All right, fair enough. And then finally, we cannot have a list like this without A Quiet Place. So that stars Millicent Simmons, the lovely Millicent Simmons, who is deaf in real life and in the movie. And in fact, her deafness is basically what allows her family to survive. When monsters are hunting based on sound, her family has an edge because they know sign language, so they are still able to communicate and stay quiet. So I think Millicent Simmons is terrific actress, period, full stop. Casting her in the role is genius, and I think very important to the film, especially because the film does speak a little bit to the deaf experience, because we experience the film sometimes when it's sort of, from her point of view, the film goes completely silent. Boy, that's eerie.
Yes, it is.
And we are very used to horror movies that have a certain quality of music, that ratchet up the tension. There's horror music tropes that something is around the corner, or you fear that something is around the corner. And so for a horror movie to go completely silent in some very pivotal moments really eats away at your heart, I have to say. So I think those were brilliant decisions that actually elevate the film and the material. And I think that has to be a pretty good argument for including this kind of representation when You get a much better film out of it when you hire somebody who actually has lived in those shoes. So that is it. That's the short list. I mean, it's not a definitive list. I'm sure there are others, but these are really good movies with really good actors that you can recommend and put on any list ever. And I'm glad to make this list today, but I'm very sad that it is so short. I would love to have so many choices that I had to edit and edit and edit. Next year, I hope there are more.
Yes, absolutely. Because it does add something just to make it more real and more lived in, which is what we're going for in film generally.
That's right.
So let's use all the resources that we have.
And I think if we had anyone disabled at the table when they were putting together the Witches movie, then maybe that thing wouldn't have happened. You know, sometimes it takes.
Sometimes it's not visible until you talk to someone who has actually had these experiences and says, "That's not okay.
That's not okay for us. Yeah,
a problem, and here's why." And once we recognize it, we say, "Okay." But until it's actually something is said, that's how these things get out. It's because no one thought of it.
That's right. That's right. It is hard to think out our own experience. So that's why we need to include as much diversity as we possibly can. And there is so much more diversity than we are ever including. And Hollywood has been actually really lagging in that. So thank you for indulging in this. Let us know if there are any particular actors or roles that you enjoyed. And yeah, December 3rd, International Day of Persons with Disabilities. 30 years after the Americans with Disabilities Act. And you can check out Crip Camp on Netflix. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.